That's why you sign on early.
Exactly.
Yep. Although the people that want you to sign on 25 minutes early, I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. Oh, can you be there half an hour? No, I don't think so.
Well, and it's easy with you guys because you seem like pros with Zoom and the computer. So
Yeah, and I say that, and now I think of times where I was sweating it down to the last second as we were trying to figure something out. So, I mean, yeah, you never know. Did you see the update I sent you, Samantha?
the new slide deck.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where I added the Buy America. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks.
A quick question, should I call the discussion portion after my slides Q&A, or should I call it discussions?
I'd recommend calling it Q&A because I think where they're going
Okay.
to type their questions is Q&A. So you can keep the same verbiage.
All right,
But
we'll keep
if
that.
you slip up and say discussion, that's fine too.
Yeah, no, I'm just looking at what I'm have on my slide here. I was just going to change it from Q&A to discussions, but if you say Q&A is better, we'll keep it.
Hello, sorry, I had another meeting. I'll have to eat lunch at 4 o'clock, I think. Hi, Mike. Welcome to the team.
Yeah.
I was on a call with Emily Kotz from NREL just a little bit ago on electric vehicles and our state work with cities and tribes.
And there's a lot going on.
Fire hose. It's a fire hose.
Every day.
I'm sure.
Or meat grinder, whatever one you want.
Well, we're so happy to have you with us today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but when they asked yesterday, can anyone do this? I was like, well, I just did it 3 times in the last few weeks, so
Perfect.
I should be able to step in and do this pretty seamlessly.
Perfect. All right. And Samantha, are you the one sharing screen and doing all of that?
No, Caitlin is for the beginning and for her section. And then Yuka and Mike will be sharing their own slides.
Got it. Well, we got 1 city and 1 county person on so far, it looks like.
Is that so? What is the rest of the crew?
I don't know. I mean, there's 18 on now, 19. It's going to start really going up here. Oh yeah, Caitlin's putting it in the
Oh,
chat.
you're talking about the new who are coming in. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm assuming they can't hear us, or can they hear us? Hello, everyone. Come on in the room and fill out the Mentimeter. We want to see who's here. We'll start in a minute or 2 here. Hello, welcome to the webinar. We'll start in a minute, but as you join us, we'll continue to put a link in so you can see and get to the Mentimeter. We're really interested who's joining us today. So please log in and select the appropriate audience. Well, the numbers are going up quick. We're up to 40 participants, and we're going to wait just like another 30 seconds, I think, and then we'll start.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are going to officially kick off this webinar. We have a Mentimeter running right now. It's only one slide, but we just wanted to get a sense of who is all participating on the webinar today. So we invite you to head to menti.com and use the code 32666478. And I'll also drop it in the chat one more time. If my copy and paste works. All right, there we go. So right now looks like a lot of local governments on the call today, a lot of cities, few counties. We have one charging company, so thanks for the representation there. Got a state, a few utility members, nonprofits, regional development organization, one other person. So that's exciting because we thought we covered all of our bases. But happy to have others join as well. So anyway, thank you for attending today's webinar. And I am actually going to pull up our official webinar slides in just a moment here. All right. So if you're here to learn about the Federal Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program, you are in the right place. We will be focusing mostly on Minnesota, but if you're from another state or just want to get information about the program, we will have that information as well. So anyway, just wanted to welcome you to today's webinar, and I am co-hosting with my partner in crime here, Diana McEwen. So together we represent Drive Electric Minnesota, which is where I'm coming from, and then Clean Energy Resource Teams, who my colleague Diana will introduce herself, and certs in general. So take it away, Diana.
Thank you so much. Yes, we're CERTS and Great Plains Institute have collaborated for the last 5 years, working with a lot of communities across the state. So we're excited to collaborate again to bring this charging funding webinar. We know lots of communities have been waiting for this funding, so we're excited to bring this presentation to you today. And CERTS is the statewide clean energy program in Minnesota, 7 regions, and we are a partnership with a shared mission to help communities do clean energy projects at the community level, clean-based. So let's do a few housekeeping things. First off, just letting folks know we are doing comments and questions through the Q&A form. We have staff that are monitoring them, and we'll bring those up as possible. It helps us kind of put some questions together, so we're asking not the same question over and over again. We will insert relevant links as we go throughout the webinar. I'll drop in the Drive Electric Minnesota link and the CERTS link in a second here. We have closed captioning, so you'll see some different things. You can show the captions, so there's instructions there. I don't like to read slides, but there's some instructions about how you can look at the captions if that's helpful to you to have that on. So just an overview of the agenda. We're going to do kind of an overview, just generally, if you're new to the space, especially what does public charging in Minnesota look like? So we'll talk about that a bit. We'll talk about, there would be an overview of this particular grant program. We're very excited. This was part of the IIJA, and you'll learn more about that acronym in a minute. And we're excited to have this funding finally come down the pike. We'll talk a bit about site planning, because that's an important piece of preparing yourself for that funding. And then we'll talk about what are the resources and assistance that are available, because we want Minnesota communities to take advantage and get this funding to really build out our network. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Moaz. He is the Great Plains Institute's Electric Vehicle Policy Specialist, and he is the co-facilitator of Drive Electric Minnesota, and my good friend. Moaz, why don't you take it over?
Thank you, Diana. So good afternoon, everyone. I will start with, well, today I just want to give as Diana mentioned, brief overview of the state of transportation electrification in the state of Minnesota. And we can also talk a little bit about what to expect. So first slide here, I think if you're here to learn about the CFI program, you're probably already up to speed on the benefits of transportation electrification, but it doesn't hurt to reiterate that, we're moving towards electrified transportation because of these benefits. It helps reduce climate change causing emissions, improves air quality, which has health benefits for all living beings, and it also saves money for consumers, whether that's fleets or private individuals purchasing these vehicles. And finally, it has potential to generate economic activity, which also creates jobs. And this is particularly true here in Minnesota, where, the state is not typically known as an auto manufacturing state, but with the move to electrified transportation, the state can really benefit. We already have a new Flyer electric bus manufacturing facility, another medium-duty truck manufacturer called Zeus Electric they're also in Minnesota, and then Tesla has a machinery manufacturing plant also in Minnesota. So that's just the beginning. There's a lot of potential there when it comes to the economy as well. But if we move on to the next slide, please, we'll just look at what the state is thinking. And Minnesota has been pretty ahead of the curve when it comes to the state's commitments to decarbonizing the state. And I want to start with the 2007 Next Generation Energy Act, which committed to up to 80% emissions reductions overall by 2050. And now to achieve that kind of emissions reductions for Minnesota, it's pertinent to address the transportation sector, which is the largest source of emissions for this state, and it's true for most states in the US. And for that, the state has the goal to electrify 20% of the light-duty vehicle fleet by 2030. And to get to 20% of all vehicles to be electric, we estimate that it's going to require close to 60% of sales to be electric by that year. And that's consistent with what the EPA, the federal EPA, recently announced these proposed rules, where they're also looking at actually 67% new sales being electric by 2032. So pretty close to what the state of Minnesota is seeing here. And then, of course, when we have electric vehicles, those benefits can really truly be achieved if the grid is cleaner. And then most of you might have followed this year the 100% clean energy bill, where we're aiming to have 100% carbon-free electricity by the year 2040. So it's all aligning. And if we move to the next slide, please, just wanted to show the automakers. The private sector is definitely cooperating. They've learned lessons from operating in other markets like Europe and California, and they know what the future holds. And they know to stay relevant, they need to make that transition. Demand is already outstripping the supply for electric vehicles in most markets. So they, as you can see on this slide, most of them have targets to electrify a significant portion, if not all of their sales at some point starting 2030. And if we move on, thank you. So looking at what's happening in the state of Minnesota, as of January 20th this year, battery electric vehicles, we had 22,951, plug-in hybrids, 11,546. So we had about 34,000 electric vehicles if you combine the two, which represents 0.37% of the light-duty vehicles on the road. And last year, if you look at 2022, EVs were about 3% of total sales. And we expect it to exceed 5% this year. So 2023 should be over 5% of sales. And that 5% is seen as the tipping point after which any technology starts really getting hold of the market, and we can expect exponential increase in sales. And we've seen this in the electric vehicle markets in other jurisdictions that are kind of ahead of Minnesota. And just to make sure that we're not just looking at very extreme adopters. I mean, even if you look at the average for United States, the US also reached that 5% tipping point last year. So we're not talking about a few states here. And it's at the state level, yes, we do expect Minnesota to get there this year. So there is that goal of electrifying 20% of our light duty fleet by 2030. And that could mean having about 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030. And if that is going to happen, in order to get to that goal, and then once we get there, to ensure that those electric vehicle drivers have a good experience, we need adequate charging infrastructure. And that's kind of what today is about. So if we move to the next slide, please, I want to talk about the state of charging infrastructure in Minnesota. So here we have a map of the level 2 charging stations. So these are the relatively cheaper to put in and slower chargers, which over the course of a workday, if you're looking at a workplace charger, or overnight for those who might install them at home. But in this case, we're looking at public charging, of course. But it usually takes about, say, 8 hours to fully charge an EV, but you can get a significant amount of charge in a few hours. So this is usually, shopping centers where you might spend some time, park in other places. This is where you'll see most of these chargers. In Minnesota, we have 561 stations and about 1,200 ports. Now, if we were to service 1 million electric vehicles, we need to be looking at about 28,000 ports. So there's a lot of potential there to fill in all the gaps you see on this map over here. And then if we move to the next slide, we'll look at the fast chargers. So these are the chargers that can charge an electric vehicle, in some vehicles in under half an hour. And it really varies with the speed and the vehicle type. But these are the fast chargers. And this slide includes the Tesla network, which can be a significant percentage of the chargers, depending on where you look. So including Tesla, we have 94 stations and about 300 ports. And then if you move into the next slide, please, we look at without Tesla, we're down to close to 100 ports. And again, to ensure that 1 million EVs are able to crisscross along the state, because it's usually along highways where these charges are especially important, but also within these cities where, you know, Uber drivers and there's some other use cases who do require a quick charge from time to time, even though that's not relevant for most EVs. And we'll discuss that later on too, what type of charging to install where. Yuka is going to cover that. So we're at 100 ports if you take Tesla out, and we will need close to 3,000 ports to really ensure that all these gaps are plugged in, which brings us to the question of how do we get these chargers in the ground? And I have a couple of slides here to look at the existing programs that Minnesota can use to invest in electric vehicle charging. So first up is the Volkswagen settlement funds, which all states received after the 2016 Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal. There is $2.9 billion that were marked for states to work on the environment. 15% of those funds can also be used for electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which Minnesota is using all 15% of that. So the Minnesota share there is $47 million, and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has been doing a terrific job at utilizing those funds, continues to invest 15% of those funds for chargers, which can be level 2 or fast chargers. If you go to the agency's website, there are different phases that they've been implementing these programs in, and new grants keep coming from time to time. So that's one option. And then if we move to the next slide, there's with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, 2 programs were created, and just want to mention this one first, and then of course the one that this webinar is about. So the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program, as the name suggests, is this formula program where $5 billion are distributed among all US states and territories, and Minnesota receives $68 million over the 5 years from fiscal year 22 to 26. The initial focus is going to be along the alternative fuel corridors that the state has selected, which currently is I-90 and I-35. And that's going to be 450 kilowatt DC fast chargers along these corridors every 50 miles, and it can only be 1 mile from an exit. So those are the requirements, which again, you could probably go in more detail on. And these are consistent for both the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program and the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program, which we're going to talk about shortly. So they have very similar requirements. NEVI, as this program is called, is initially focused on these corridors, and there the requirements are the same as the CFI program has for its corridor portion. And we'll get into more details and kind of separate the two. But if you go to the next slide, the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program. Now, unlike NEVI, it's not a formula program. There's no guaranteed funding for any state or jurisdiction. It's a competitive program where eligible entities can apply for $2.5 billion in the grants. And again, yes, it's been divided into a community program and then a corridor program. We'll go into details on both. And well, with that, I think I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
We're running a minute or two behind, so I think we're going to try to jump unless there's a couple questions, but we might be able to just wait and do them at the end after Mike. We want to make sure Mike has enough time to do his presentation. So I think we're going to move to Mike. So we're really happy to have a special guest today from the Joint Office. We have Mike Scarpino. He is the Interim Technical Equity Assistance and Capacity Building Lead at the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. That's a long title. Providing technical support to states implementing the Biden-Harris administration's goal of building a national network of electric vehicle chargers. We're here for that. He also provides technical and program support for various transportation electrification and alternative fuel initiatives and activities, including Federal Highway Administration and Department of Energy. He has over 35 years of federal experience and holds a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from the University of Maine. Welcome, Mike. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. So I will just going to turn off my video for bandwidth purposes and then pull up my slides. And then there's always that awkward, 3 seconds of, will this really work? Are you seeing, hopefully you're seeing the screen.
We do indeed see your screen.
All right.
If you want to put it in presenter mode?
Yep.
Perfect.
Looking good?
Perfecto.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for the invitation to speak today on, I know there's always lots of acronyms. So if you've heard CFI and you're not even sure what it is, it's the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Program that came out of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or bill. So that is kind of the topic du jour. This is where the money is available. And I'm going to go over the funding opportunity announcement. So I was just going to give a quick overview of what the Joint Office is, what we've been working on. We just had a little overview of NEVI, so I will be even briefer on that, spend the most of my time on the CFI program, and then talk a little about some Joint Office resources that could help entities that are interested in applying. This is a disclaimer that I will not read, but essentially because this is an open solicitation, I'm kind of limited in what I can answer when we go into the Q&A. So I'm just going to kind of walk through the notice of funding opportunity, or NOFO, another acronym. But if there's general questions, I should be able to answer them. But if you're asking me, hey, is this a good strategy for me to definitely win the money? That's probably nothing I can talk about. So real quick, for those that might not know about the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, it was established when the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law was passed back in November of 2021, and MOU was signed between Department of Energies and Transportation to formally establish the Joint Office. I've been part of the Joint Office since its inception. It's basically a critical component in implementing the electric vehicle charging programs that are in the bill. It's new to government. There really has never been this joint office of two different agencies, so we definitely have a lot of eyes on it. Luckily, so far the reviews have been good, and we hope to continue as both the NEVI program and the CFI programs march on to actual deployment of the infrastructure. So basically our mission is supporting a convenient, accessible, reliable, and equitable infrastructure build out. We see ourselves as kind of the front door to the federal government. So we work very closely with the states, energy offices, departments of transportation, environmental offices. And then now with CFI, we'll be working with a whole new set of stakeholders in community, cities, planning organizations. We see ourselves as kind of a conveyor of federal agencies, private sector companies, NGOs, academia. So all the important components that are needed to build this nationwide network. So the programs that we have been focused on have been, the $5 billion formula NEVI program. So each of the 50 states plus Puerto Rico and DC received formula funding for NEVI. And I'll talk a little more about that in a second. The deep dive will be on the $2.5 billion for CFI. which is providing funding for both corridors and communities. It's for EV charging, but it's also for hydrogen, natural gas, and propane fueling infrastructure. And we'll talk a little more about that. Other technical support that the Joint Office provides is for a couple of bus programs. One is the FTA Transit Low-No Emissions Program, and one is for EPA's new Clean School Bus Program. So Joint Office is involved in providing technical assistance for all of these programs. Real quick on NEVI, it was just covered, but basically it's a formula grant program that is initially, the funding is for building out corridors that states have designated. Federal Highway developed a designation program for corridors back in 2016. And for 6 previous rounds, 1 per year, states have been designating corridors across the country. And what NEVI is intended to do is to actually build out those corridors. So the initial funding to all of the states, DC and Puerto Rico, is to build out designated corridors. Most states will probably have some funding left once that all the interstates are built out. And at that point, the states can kind of pivot and use the remaining funding for any public road or publicly accessible locations, or what essentially we have been calling communities. Real quick, the first year plans were submitted for NEVI back in August. They were approved at the end of September. That unlocked FY 22 and 23 funding for all of the states. In Minnesota, that's over 24 million. And then NEVI over the 5-year life will provide 68 million for NEVI, for Minnesota. So this is a decent amount of funding. All right, so now we'll get into CFI. So CFI ends up being a little confusing. I don't know if anyone has read the NOFO. It definitely took me a few times. What I try to do here with these slides is not only cover the important information, but also provide references back to the NOFO. So when I'm done, you can pull these slides up as a reference and say, he said something about that. Where was that? And then it'll give you the pages to the NOFO. But as I mentioned earlier, it's a $2.5 billion. This is a competitive program. So the formula just went to every state, cranked out through the formula. This is a competition. And the money is divided into 2 buckets, one for corridors and one for communities. For this first round of applications that are due the end of May, so coming up quick, there's 700 million available. That's split at 350 million apiece for the corridor and the community pieces. All right, so eligible infrastructure for CFI. As I mentioned, this is different from NEVI. NEVI is completely focused on EV charging. CFI really builds on the corridor designation program, which included not only electric, but hydrogen, natural gas, and propane. So depending on what you have designated in your state, the state may be looking at some things beyond electric, but I know most people are focused, laser focused on electric, and some with hydrogen looking ahead. So, all right, so let's talk about the community section. So in the community grant program, 350 million available across the country. It has a minimum anticipated award of 500,000 and a max of 15 million. So the 500,000 says that this probably isn't funding for, the library in town wants to put in a level 2 charger. 500,000 would indicate this is something, beyond that, or, groups of cities, or, a larger deployment. As I said, it could be used on any public road, but the charger must be publicly accessible. It can't be behind a fence, only serving, one fleet or, one say condo association. These funds, you may use these funds, so whoever is awarded these, to contract with a private entity. We'll see there's a difference with the corridor funding. Must address environmental justice. We're looking to reduce greenhouse gases and have ADA compliance. Now we'll look at corridors. So corridors, it has a minimum anticipated award of $1 million. So more than the community, and oddly enough, it doesn't have a max. So you could propose anything. But probably keep in mind, this is a national competition, and of course you wouldn't want to go in for the whole 350 million. Because this is working in conjunction with the alt fuel corridor program, the requirements for alt fuel corridors, our stations need to be within a mile of the exits for EVs, and for the other alternative fuels, hydrogen, natural gas, or propane, you get a little more room. You can go out to 5 miles beyond the actual interstate. Once again, this must be publicly accessible. Now, these funds must be used to contract with a private entity. So I'm not sure many communities or cities would want to build and own and operate their own facilities for either charging or fueling. But in this case, with the corridor funding, you actually do need to flow these funds down to a private entity. All right, so recipient eligibility, a lot of these are the usual suspects for public DOT programs. So states, MPOs, units of local governments. This one, NEVI did not carve out money specifically for tribes. So this is kind of the first opportunity for tribal entities to apply as a lead applicant. And then you can see that there is a state or local authorities with ownership of publicly accessible transportation facilities. That's only under the community bucket. So here's where I'll start to reference where things are in the NOFO, where it'll be easier for you to find. So the eligibility requirements are on pages 18 and 19. Cost share information, I won't go into all the details, but basically it's up to 80% federal and at least 20% for match. So that's not bad, 80-20, that's typical of DOT programs. Go to pages 19 and 20 of the NOFO for more information. So eligible projects in the community, as we've kind of said, publicly accessible charging and fueling on any public road or publicly accessible locations or publicly accessible parking facilities. Those are all of the places that you could put the funds. With corridors, once again, they have to be along what has been previously designated an alt fuel corridor by federal highway, publicly accessible. If these alt fuel corridors do happen to go through any tribal areas, they must be consulted. And then, as we mentioned before, for the EV charging infrastructure, no greater than a mile from the interstate exits on these corridors. And with the other fuel, it can be up to 5. So there's some interesting, as I say, if you've read the NOFO, there's all sorts of tidbits of things that you would probably want to include in your proposal, and I'm going to highlight a few of these. So there's the basic requirements that we just went through, and then for the community program, it talks about these are areas that Federal Highway is interested in. So these are focus areas that they're interested in. So as you're putting your application together, this is probably good information for you to be thinking about. So under the community bucket, multimodal hubs, share use fleets and services, urban, suburban, charging, urban, and then also rural, and then fleet vehicles that operate in communities. More details on what all of these mean, go to pages 26 through 28. So for corridor programs, they also have areas that they say they're interested in. So this is building out the corridors, which seems like kind of a natural. Also looking at corridors for medium and heavy duty vehicles. And then looking at for resiliency. So this is promoting reliability and resiliency to intermittent or sustained power outages, disruptive or increasing severe weather. So snowstorms, fires, hurricanes, things that basically could strain the grid or put the station out of business for a short period of time. More details there on page 31 to 33. Community, here is under the community, they say these are statutory selection priorities. So something else to consider. Under communities, they're interested in funding rural areas, low and moderate income neighborhoods, and communities with a low ratio of private parking spaces to households or a high ratio of multi-unit dwellings. Page 50 for more info. All right, so since I have got a time limit and I'm coming right up on it, there are other areas that I think you would probably be interested in looking at, and I flagged them here. Program goals on page 2, eligible costs on pages 20 through 23. The actual merit review criteria, how your application will be judged, is on pages 41 through 49. We talked about statutory priorities. There's more things to consider. So for the community program, look at pages 50 to 51, and for the corridor programs, 51 to 52. And then priority considerations, another layer of things to consider, are on pages 53. I did want to mention that the minimum standards was released back in mid-February. It provides requirements for connector types, power levels, number of ports, uptime, payment methods, workforce development, a lot of information. Any funding that's applied for through CFI needs to comply with these minimum standards. So there's a link if you're not familiar with them. These also are applicable to NEVI. Did also want to mention that Buy America requirements are applicable for the CFI program. Federal Highway issued a 2-phase waiver back in February, where chargers that have to be assembled in the US, if they're assembled in the US before July 1st of 2024 and installation begins before October 1st, then there is a waiver on the Buy America requirements. Anything after July 1st, it still needs to be assembled in the US, plus at least 25% of the components in the charger need to be manufactured in the US. So there's not a lot to say there without going into lots of detail. There's some good links for you. Any questions about the program as they come up? Any details about the NOFO? Really the place to go with those questions is cfigrants.gov. Real quick, if you go to driveelectric.gov on the Joint Office website, we've got resources, communities, states, tribal, school districts, transit agencies. We also have webinars that we've been putting together that are focused on the needs of the CFI communities, folks that are interested in applying. So go to the Joint Office webinar page, and we've got a lot of good stuff coming up. And
thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah.
Can you go back to that slide? I know that there's the other webinar that's happening, I think, right as we were talking. We should have coordinated our schedules better.
Yeah.
The community charging models. I believe some of us are signed up so we can get a recording of that. So
yeah, there is a recording, and you can go back, and anything you've missed, you can go back and watch.
For sure. Thank you so much. So there are a couple questions in the but there's, one is about the slide decks. Yes, we will be sending the slide deck out. Everyone will get the slide decks. Some of the other questions are not exactly related to CFI, but we could, I guess we could ask them anyways. One is, it was just announced today, but what do you think about the impact of GM no longer manufacturing Chevy Bolts? I'll just say, and others can speak to this, that is a pretty affordable electric vehicle. So that's a sad thing, I would say personally. But I don't know if Mike or maybe even Waz or Yuka want to comment on that.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. Yeah, I don't know that I can say anything official, but unofficially, that's unfortunate. I'm still kind of mad that they don't do the Volt anymore. So yeah, I will say that the sales keep going up and up, and there's more and more offerings. So back when the Bolt came out, that may have been the one long distance vehicle. Now there are many options. So
right.
I think we can weather that one.
Right. You have a comment?
Oh, I think that they have already announced that they are coming up with a couple of other models this fall. So we're just waiting to see those and get those in the market.
They're not giving up on going electric.
No.
Exactly.
Okay. There's another question. Oh, it's Lucas Franco from La Una, Minnesota North Dakota Construction Labor Union. Are there incentives or priorities for workforce plans for construction practices on CFI funded projects, like use of union labor or contractors partnered with registered apprenticeship programs? Do you know, Mike?
Yeah, so the final rule, which I mentioned on one of the last slides that gives the requirements for, these are statutory requirements. There are requirements on workforce. You have to have EVTP certification or some other program. So yeah, if you do a deeper dive into the final rule, there are the requirements there for the workforce.
Okay. I'm going to keep us on pace here. There's one other question in here, but it's a little bit, it's hard to understand who's directed to. Lee, thank you for the question. Do you know about Troy Schmidtke of Design Ready Controls, which is producing EV chargers in Albert Lea? I don't, but I'm guessing Yuka does. I don't know if Mike does.
Nope, I don't.
Now you do.
Yes, all right.
Maybe somebody can pop out, maybe we'll get a link and pop it in there. But
Yeah, if there's a link.
We love having components built in Minnesota. We love that. So bring it.
I mean, that's the whole, people will complain about Buy America, but it's really a good thing. We need to establish domestic, manufacturing capability and produce everything here. So that's all good news.
We have at least 3 charging infrastructure manufacturers in Minnesota. So that is true.
Yep.
Right.
Awesome. Well, I'm just going to turn it over. Yuka, we'll just have more time for question and answer at the end, which as people are listening, they might have more questions that come up. But I'm going to introduce Yuka Kukkonen. He is the Chief EV Educator and Strategist for Shift to Electric. He's an automotive engineer by training and former Ford area manager. He's worked with the EV market for over a dozen years. He also teaches EV market and technologies at the University of St. Thomas. We'll drop the link for Shift to Electric in the chat. Also, our very good friend for a long time, and he was actually the one that gave me a test drive in my first EV before I bought mine in 2013. So a good friend. Thanks, Yuka. Why don't you go ahead and tell us all about planning best practices?
All right, thank you for having me here today. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's talk about site planning ideas here a little bit. So I'm sharing my screen here. My approach, portion here will be more about site planning ideas here for you. We will have a very short time period here to be able to get these applications in, because this has been in May 30th already. So I hope that I can give you a couple of ideas that help you in the process. Yeah, so let's move on. I remind just a quick one-on-one on charging. So level 1 charging is used at homes, where you can use just a normal household outlet. Works well if you drive less than 30 miles a day. Great. If you drive more than 30 miles a day, go to the level 2. So home charging, the white unit there is a home charger, and then we have the public charging stations example there on the right there of those. And the idea with these is that you can charge your car fully overnight at home, or get a good charge in a few hours, as Moa said there. And then the fastest way to charge your car is using the DC fast charging stations. And here's a picture of a DC fast charging station that we used to install quite a bit here in Minnesota too over the years. The idea with these is that you drive anywhere, you can charge in 20 to 40 minutes in most of the cases, from 20 to 80% or something like that. But the fastest way to do that anyways. The thing though to remember right now is that we used to do these single units in different locations, just install those, and they were great to get some infrastructure in. But really nowadays, the charging side should look more like this, where you have multiple cords in the same location, at least 4 to 6. They can be individual units, the standalone units like the one that I showed you in a picture, or they can be kind of things that are nowadays becoming more popular is having a separate power cabinet and then the dispensers there for charging. If you think about what kind of charging stations you should put in a public areas, level 2s work well if customers' 12 time is expected to be hours, then level 2 is a good choice. If the dwell time that you expected people to stay at that location is minutes, then you think about DC fast charging. This is a pretty clear thing. So anytime you look at any of the location, you start to think about how long are people gonna stay here. If it's hours, then okay, you can consider level 2. That's good choice for there. If it's minutes, then think about DC fast charging, just as a rule of thumb. All right, Moaz already showed you some information about what the market looks like and what we have, but just wanted to give you another perspective here. So this is from Minnesota Department of Transportation electric vehicle dashboard, which you can go and check out all the great information they provide there. But let's look at the DC fast charging infrastructure specifically here in Minnesota. So you can see the blue graph there on the right. We have grown to have 324 charging ports in Minnesota. But then if you go to the left side, you can see that 200 of those are Tesla charging stations. And that's the challenge we have. We have very little DC fast charging infrastructure right now for other than Tesla users. And of course, as Morse explained, we will need much more. I'll do a comparison here to my country of origin, Finland, which is about 1/3 bigger than Minnesota. It has exactly the same amount of population, and it has the same kind of climate as Minnesota does. So it's a good comparison point. They used to be in sales-wise in the same where we are right now about 4 or 5 years ago. And right now, over 50% of the vehicles already sold in Finland are electric. So they are a good comparison point for us to look at what does our system should look like in 4 years, for example. And here's their numbers from Minnesota. So if we had 324 units, and outside of Tesla, we had only 100 DC fast charging stations. The blue graph there is a combined DC fast charging stations in Minnesota. They have 1,500 DC fast charging stations. An interesting thing that in Finland, only 5% of them roughly are Tesla charging stations. So they are available for everyone. So you can imagine how much work we have to do to get to that number, even in 4 or 5 years. But that's why we have to start working right now. We have to be very proactive to make things happen. All right. My recommendation is for you to concentrate on the community program here, because the corridor program is, we have so few miles on that. We have only Highway 94 and Highway 35 on the on NEVI funded programs for corridors, and that funding is coming already from NEVI. So my recommendation is think about more of the community programs. So that's why I'm focusing on that. So technical requirements for that are the budget, as we heard from Mike there, between 500,000 and 15 million. As you can imagine, this is not just a 1 or 2 charging stations somewhere. You have to do something a little bigger or multiple locations together with different partners. That's how you want to approach this. Minimum of 4 charging ports, and it can be both level 2s and DC fast charging. So again, think about the different locations, what works where. Level 2 stations have to be minimum of 6 kilowatts. That's pretty understandable. And DC fast charging infrastructure have to use CCS connectors. They have to be publicly accessible, as mentioned there. They have to be network connected. At minimum, they must have contactless payment methods that accept major credit cards as well as helpline. You don't need to have that one if you're providing the charging for free. I would not recommend that though. It's always best to have price on the public charging, so they are available for those who really need them. They have to be ADA compliant, and there has to be 97% uptime on the charging stations. Then if you think about starting to do the infrastructure plans, first you can start to brainstorm the potential concepts and sites, what works for you. And I'll be showing you some nice pictures that hopefully get you going with that. Engage with stakeholders, work with a variety of different stakeholders, talk with potential site owners, work with utility companies. Utility companies are key to all of this, so definitely engage them right away. And talk with other partner organizations, whoever they might be in your area. Use the resources. There's already been a lot of resources shared, and Caitlin will continue to share more. So you will have no shortage of resources, webinar recordings, documents, and then talk with industry experts. And I'm not trying to sell my time here. There are so many great people now who can help you with all of this. CERT has all kinds of peer learning programs, and talk with other cities what they have done. And even the charging infrastructure providers, talk with them and see what kind of solutions they can provide. what they would recommend for different locations. That'll give you more information about it. And then for years, I've been talking about for all the stakeholders that please start to have regional charging strategies. If you don't have one yet, now it's time to start putting one together. And regional charging strategy means that you look at your whole area and think about what should the public charging infrastructure look like in 1 to 2 years, what should it look like in 3 to 4 years, and what should it look like in 5 to 10 years. And then on the bottom right corner, there's a little picture of the site plan, and why I wanted to include this one here just to tell you, you don't have to be building the site plans yet before the application. You can then get all the detailed site plans and all of that done if you are awarded the funds and can use that. And then all of this work is not going to be wasted, even if you don't happen to get the funding this time. Because if you have good ideas and you have good plans, there will be new rounds of funding coming, and you will get those funded for sure in the future. So just do as much planning as you want. It'll definitely pay off in the long run. And the other thing is that if we don't get applications in from Minnesota, we're not going to get penny to Minnesota for charging infrastructure. This money only is going to be provided to the applicants, and Minnesota will not get anything if we don't put applications in. So that's one reason why we definitely wanted to talk with you about this. All right, next I will quickly show you some pictures of what different charging infrastructure looks like in Nordic countries, because they are, again, 5 to 7 years ahead of us in this one. So why not just check what they have done to see if there's something that we could just steal from them in that way. Right now, as I said, in Finland, over 50% of the EV cells or vehicle cells are electric. In Sweden, over 60% of the vehicle cells electric, and in Norway, over 90% of light-duty vehicle cells electric. So they are a little bit ahead. Here are some photos of what they have been putting together there. So here's a picture of Norway, where they have put this kind of a wooden canopy over the charging stations, and they also use the display screens there. And I think this one is by a grocery store chain there. So I'm guessing a local Whole Foods type of a thing, or some co-op. That's what they put there. Many locations, they use different kind of canopies, and here's an example of one canopy there. This is by, as you can see behind there, there's a McDonald's. So again, you have to have the amenities there right by it. Here's the similar kind of canopy in different location. You can see that the DC fast charging stations are under the canopy. Then there's actually one double-headed level 2 charging station there outside. So you can do these kind of combinations there. Here's another canopy idea. And of course, if you have this kind of view, you should definitely put DC fast charging or any EV charging into that location. Great view and all, but then you're like, where's the amenities? In this picture, if you look at the left lower corner there, you can see a small corner of a building there. There's actually a convenience store down there. So you just have to walk down to that convenience store to have the amenities there. Here's a grocery store chain, how they have put the DC fast charging stations and also some level 2 charging stations on their lots. Grocery stores are excellent location for these. Then, of course, convenience stores, gas stations. Here's one example of how they have been done in Norway. At the same site, they actually have more charging infrastructure here. So this is the same site here. So quite a bit of charging there at that place. And here's another gas station, nowadays electric station. Under that canopy, that's all electric charging there. And we will see these kind of things in next 5-10 years for sure. This is what many places will look like. So just get ready for it. And I would say start working with your local smaller convenience stores, because probably the bigger chain stores will get it from their own chain. Restaurants and other places like that, excellent locations for this. Hotels and parking ramps. I choose hotels where I'm staying based on if they provide me charging. And level 2, of course, is a very good solution for hotels, because People are usually staying there overnight. Here's another picture of a different kind of canopy in Finland in colder weather conditions. And this is actually me charging my brother's Kia EV6 that I was driving in Finland last December here. And here's a good side where you can see actually pull-through stations. This is a very good thing to think about always, is that if you can do a pull-through stations in your site, do that. And we have to remember that we have this thing called winter, a little bit of snow. So make sure that the systems that you buy and get to your site are ready for those conditions. So that's a good thing to remember. And one example from Minnesota that I wanted to share with you, this is a Canal Park in Duluth, where they have this nice solar canopy and then charging stations underneath that. Right now they have one DC fast charging station and I think 8 level 2 charging stations underneath that. That site definitely, this was built several years ago. Now, I would recommend putting most of those as a DC fast charging stations into these locations and some level 2s. I think that would be a better combination there. But excellent idea, excellent concept, and I think definitely benchmark this one if you have a good site for something like this. And then one more slide from Finland. Savonlinna is the first city in Finland to fully electrify their bus fleet, and Savonlinna is my home town. I grew up there. And how did they electrify their whole bus fleet? Well, Savonlinna has only 30,000 people living in there, and they're built in 3 different islands, and they have only 4 bus lines. And so they maybe have 10 buses. That's why they can electrify the whole bus lines. And if you think about this, they don't have school buses in Finland. They use the public transportation for school, busing people to school and back. So I, for example, grew up in just outside of the town there. We had a farm there, and then I just go to the bus and then rode the bus to school. So it has 2 purposes, but that's something to also consider. And there are new funding for school bus programs. I'm sure we will talk about that. And this is what Savonlinna looks like in the summertime. So just wanted to share you that too. Those were my slides. All right.
All right, Jukka, thank you for that. So we're gonna go to some question and answer. We have some in the chat. So this is for you, Jukka. How do you respond to people who say that EVs aren't appropriate in Minnesota because of our winter weather? Seems to me you could point to their success in Finland, Sweden, or Norway, which I think he asked this question before you showed all those slides.
Yeah, most likely, but that's really the story. It's like Finland, for example, they don't see the sun in the wintertime. Their roads are iced over wintertime because there's no sun there. So it's actually harsher conditions, and it's not going to be slowing them down. So I don't think there's any reason for us to slow down.
Well, and just building on that, there's another question. Thanks, Noel. Are EV charging station installers in Minnesota starting to consider kind of the need for those canopies to help with keeping stations sheltered from snow and rain?
We haven't had too many of those yet, but that's definitely something that I would recommend everybody to take into account. And now, especially when there's these funding opportunities, to write that into there, is to say, hey, in our conditions, they help both ways. They help in the wintertime to keep snow off, and in the summertime when you have really hot weather and sun is just heating up those stations, that might slow the power down on the stations because they might overheat. Much better to have some canopy there in all locations.
Preferably with solar panels.
Preferably with solar panels, yes.
Mike, were you hopping on to say something?
I saw one of the questions in the chat was any insight on how long it takes to put together a winning grant proposal, I'm assuming. I mean, I'm sure there's folks here that are writing grants all the time. I'm reviewing them. I think it takes a lot of hours. What I will say is it also takes many members of the team. You must partner with, utilities, equipment providers, site hosts. I would agree with the previous comment that even if you don't have anything in place for May 30th, starting now to think about because there will be more of this funding a year from now. A lot of times, these projects can take many months to put together. So I feel bad when they come out and only give you 75 days to put an application, but I think it's always smart to be thinking of the next round of money. There will be NEVI money coming out too. So starting to build those relationships, bringing in partners, identifying sites, working with utilities. It's all work that could be started now.
Great, thank you. That's appreciated. Yeah, it is a lot of work, and we're supporting some efforts here in Minnesota on the CERTS team. But so I want to go, since there's no questions, I have a question. Yuka, you talked about those regional charging strategies. I think a lot of people are really thinking about that. And I think it feels hard because you're not sure who all to invite to that table. And, kind of like, could you say a little bit more about, who should you include in that conversation? I think utility is obvious. But other than that, there's businesses out there and nonprofits and cities that are starting to plan and think about their EV charging. And if you want a full picture, you really kind of want the right people in the room to really understand what is being planned.
Yeah, if you have an opportunity to put together really a regional charging infrastructure strategy session, get everybody in room. You have electricians, you have the site, get the site host, get the municipal city people, their utilities, and even local EV owners to provide their expertise there into the mix, and then have someone do just a basic presentation about EVs and charging infrastructure, so people are getting on the same page before you start to talk about it. Because if they don't know enough, then the discussions might be hard. But if there's a like CERTS, Diana, you have done a ton of these kind of things. So CERTS can do this kind of a help you with this kind of thing to educate people, to get them on the same page, and then you can start to talk about the actual. Okay, what does this look like in our area? Where should we do them? Where should we put some charging infrastructure? Hotels, hospitals, all of those places to include everybody there. Tourism at the same time, definitely. Gas station, convenience store owners, developers. I mean,
that's a lot of people.
There's a lot of people, but it
would be easier if you just said who not to invite. I'm pretty sure.
Exactly. But they are really, really great events. I've done several of those, and Diana has done a ton of them. So it's really good to get people together, provide them information, provide them an opportunity to ask all the questions, and then start to have discussions. Right. What does this all look like in our area?
Right. No, that's really great. Did you have something? I saw Mike, you dropped something.
Yeah, I'm trying to do a cut and paste, and I'm having issues with PDF. The NEVI program guidance, starting on page 24, lists like 30 entities that you would want to work with. Now, obviously, you can't work with all of these groups, but it's good information. I'll see if I could just find the link instead of the cut. But there's just so many people to work with that are really, many of them are needed. Yeah, I'm not pasting. I'll find the page itself.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. So we do have another really good question. So we have some folks on here that maybe don't know as much about EVs. I think it's a whole range on the call. So what is the general equipment cost range for a 4-port fast charger in a community? And either one of you guys, I think, can answer that.
So I'll say along corridors, which have to all be 4 ports, have to all be fast charging. We started off NEVI thinking it might be around 500,000, but now more and more states that we're talking to are saying it might be closer to 1 million. Now, level 2 is much less, and I'm not sure. Somewhere in that, sometimes you hear 50K, which to me almost seems too small. Probably, I would guess more around 100. 125. A lot of it has to do more with labor than it actually does, the equipment costs. I don't know if you have any other.
The costs.
Yeah.
I mean, the NEVI, of course, has a specific requirements which require 4 ports and 150 kilowatt each simultaneously. So that makes sure that you will have quite a bit of site power there too. in a smaller communities, if there's a what I would recommend is that you can future-proof the site so that it's never ready in the future. But you could start with something smaller. You might start with, let's say, 100 kilowatt charging, or let's say the unit itself is maybe 200 kilowatt charging or something like that, the site power, and then it's shared between those like if you have 4 cords there already. If there's just one person using, they might get 150, 175, but then if there's all of those are taken, maybe everybody gets only 50 kilowatts. Might be fine for some site to start with, but make sure that it's easy to to upgrade it in the future to a higher level, and that way you can get the lower budget installation to start with, but it's ready for the future.
That's great. I mean, yeah, definitely. Even if you're doing the level 2, whatever you're doing, lay more conduit than you need, for sure. It's a rule of thumb. That's really appreciated. I appreciated, Mike, you talking about, or maybe it was you, Yuka, that you don't need to have the site plans to apply, because you can use some of the funding to kind of develop those site plans. But I'm guessing you have to have some location, like you have to point, might not say where on that location it's going to be, here or here in this parking lot, but it's going to be at the general corner store at 14th and blah, or do you have to have that? So like, I just want to understand, I want people to understand, what do they need to know for the locations for the application? Like, what is the stuff that they really need to know or have determined?
I'll say that the NOFO itself does not specify, so I don't want to say, but I would just say in general, the more specific you can be is always best.
Yeah.
If somebody really needed to know, I would put something in under that CFI official, I'll put that in the link too.
Okay, great.
In general, I think for these things, it's good to have the overall plan in place. Again, just don't worry about all the technical details yet. You can specify those, all the detailed ones, but as long as you have a good plan, as long as you explain how this helps your community and Minnesota overall, I think that's more important than explaining that I want to use 2-inch conduit in this location or anything like that. So
right, and that's great. Go ahead.
If you remember all those slides that said, we want you to consider this, we want you to consider that, we want you to consider that. I don't know how specific all those were, but it was urban, rural, multi-use. So yeah, strategy is important.
Well, and I, we were really happy to see the emphasis on rural in Minnesota. You sometimes forget, if you're in the cities, that we're a very, very, very rural state. And, it is really hard. We have to acknowledge it's really hard to drive electric in greater Minnesota. They drive longer. It's just, there's not as much charging. And when a charger is down, and there was a question actually about what does uptime mean? I don't know if maybe that was answered, but it's about how much time is that, is it available? Because I'm an EV driver and I've gotten somewhere where I needed to charge and the charging station was down. And if you're in greater Minnesota and the next one is 100 miles away, you're stuck. And we've, so we want to acknowledge it. We definitely want, people to, and if you're a 2-car family or others, there's, options. But, we really want to acknowledge that. We hear that. We don't think just because there's more in the metro that it works the same way in greater Minnesota. And so we're really working hard, both Drive Electric Minnesota and CERTS, to ensure additional charging infrastructure in greater Minnesota and a dialogue about it as well. So thanks to folks that are on the call from greater Minnesota. We hear you.
Reliability is extremely important in the future. We are definitely need to improve that in the US, and that's one thing that I've seen also in Nordic countries. They have done something good there. Their reliability is much better there. So again, steal all the ideas that you can anytime you can. Part of it is also redundancy. Where we have been just installing 1 or 2 units, and that is, if something goes south, then the whole site is down. Whereas if you have 4 to 6 stalls, it stays in its location, then it's much easier to have a higher reliability.
All right, well, we're gonna thank you both. Don't go away. We're gonna move to resources and assistance. I think that's, what folks are, in addition to clarity, we wanna, make sure people have the resources that they need. So I'm gonna introduce my colleague, Caitlin Bachlan. She is the Senior Program Manager of the Transportation and Fuels team at the Great Plains Institute, and she is also the co-facilitator of Drive Electric Minnesota. And my friend, Caitlin.
Great. Thanks, Diana. So we have already been getting some good questions about, this is a very large federal grant program. Our community is small. How do we apply for it? So I'm going to go over some resources and technical assistance that is available to you so that you can tap into these opportunities. I'll start with more general resources and then get more specific to the CFI program. So first, I just wanted to put a shameless plug out there for Drive Electric Minnesota. On our website, we have a charging guidance page. It is designed to be more general and just kind of get you thinking about all of the steps along the way, the things that you'll need to consider to select a charger, purchase a charger, select a site, and install a charger. All of those parts can be downloaded or used interactively, except for the very first part, which is selecting a charging station. That is designed as an interactive survey, so we don't have a downloadable form of that yet. But anyway, in case you don't know that the resource exists, it's out there for you to use. And then in addition to that, a Shift to Electric's resource, mudcharging.com, is more specific to multi-unit dwelling charging. So we've heard that one of the priorities for the CFI program is to look at installing charging stations within multi-unit dwellings and having those accessible to renters. So this site provides you with a couple of tools to just, again, think about those opportunities. There's a power and energy calculator, and there's also a metering and payment systems table out there for you. The DOT also has a really great resource. It's called the DOT Navigator. So this is put out there by the U.S. Department of Transportation. It does have a general checklist on their website about just, what you need to prepare for any type of fiscal year 23 discretionary grants. And so whether or not you're thinking about applying to the CFI program, I encourage you to check out this website and look at the checklist, because there's a lot of great tips out there. They also have a lot of technical assistance resources, such as resource centers, fact sheets, and guides that you can tap into. There's tips on just how to navigate federal funding applications in general. So if you've never applied to a federal funding application before, this could be a really great site for you. And there's lots and lots of other resources out there that we don't have time to get into today, but we'll send around all of these links after the webinar today. If you are based in more greater Minnesota and rurally located, I'd also encourage you to look at this toolkit that was developed by the U.S. Department of Transportation specifically for getting charging stations into rural communities. So as part of that toolkit, there is an EV and charging infrastructure overview. There's a project planning checklist, how to incorporate equity into that planning, and lots of other good things in that toolkit. Mike already talked about the resources that the Joint Office provides, but this is just another slide letting you know that they also have technical assistance. There's a lot of different data and tools that you can access through the website. And they also encourage you to reach out to the Joint Office through the Contact Us form. Electrification Coalition is another nonprofit that we work with that has a whole page dedicated to the CFI. And so they have a lot of great resources and tools out there, top 10 takeaways. So really just distilling down the nuts and bolts of the program for you. There's another webinar that they did that was more general about the CFI. There's a guidance table that really clearly compares the community and corridor programs, pulling out all of the key information that you need to know from the NOFO. There's also a decision tree and application toolkit available on that website. And then our partners over at Fourth Mobility, they offer CFI assistance. So if you are a community that is maybe looking for a little bit more hands-on assistance, Fourth does have funding to provide more of that hands-on assistance. And they can also help you think through possible matching, cost sharing, connect you to other technical assistance, or even provide that technical assistance. And they might even be able to assist with the actual application. And then lastly, I'll just mention that if you pre-registered for this, you might have already heard about the project partner list that we're compiling. But we do have a project partner list out on our website. There's a form that you can fill out and add your organization to the list. And so as soon as you fill out that form, your contact information, your organization will be added to the spreadsheet that we've got. So you can fill it out at any time. And you can also look to see who else has already added their name to the list. So we're hoping that by providing this, it will help you connect with other entities that are either looking to apply or that have resources to offer. So you can reach out to them and, you know, try and connect with them as part of this application process. We will also be looking at the list ourselves and trying to connect organizations to one another. But with that, I will turn it back over to Diana to address some more questions that have come in.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for that. Jill Curran, thank you for the question. Is there a discussion happening on putting EV charging stations at current gas stations? I know it's a big question. I know it's, I knew Yuka was going to hop on because it's something that obviously they're doing in Scandinavian countries. So why don't you take that one?
Yeah, there definitely is a lot of discussion on this one. Right now, I think most of the gas stations and convenience stores are first looking at the NEVI funding because that has been out there before, but it doesn't mean that we can engage them with the CFI funding too. Especially, as I said, for more local convenience stores that might not even be part of bigger chains. This might be a good opportunity for them. So yeah, have a chat with them, see what they think.
Great. Another question was asked is, are funding applications typically done online? I'm guessing yes, but perhaps Mike, you could answer that.
I don't believe they would be generated online, but most of them are uploaded. It's probably, and I don't know if it's asking for a Word doc or a PDF, but typically one of those versions. Usually there's a page limit. There's not with CFI, which has some of the folks that may be reviewing those a little nervous.
Yeah, right. All right. Great. Other questions? I mean, one of the things, you know, we have some folks in Minnesota that are looking at this and thinking about this, and one of the challenges, and especially rural communities, historically disadvantaged communities, is that this is a, you know, you get the grant, but you have to pay and do the things and then get reimbursed. So if you're a rural community with not a lot of resources, or a disadvantaged community in an urban area, how do you fund it up front? Like, I think that that's a real struggle.
Yeah, that is. I mean, as attractive as 80-20 sounds, I worked for many years at Department of Energy, and it was typically 50-50. So 80-20 sounds great, but even 20% of $1 million project is something. You know, this is this is why, partnering is very important, because, there may be deeper pockets depending on who the partners are that you're bringing to the table.
But
That
even
may be-
besides the match, don't they have to pay to install and do all the things and then get reimbursed?
Right, that too, so, yeah.
I
mean,
have
most-
heard. Oh, sorry,
ahead.
Mike.
I was gonna
I
say, most
have
federal
heard,
government agents, most federal government programs are reimbursable, so, I mean, this is something we struggle with, but that's
Right.
kind of the way it is. Sorry, Caitlin.
No, no worries. I was just going to mention that I have heard it's pretty common practice to write in the contract language that the vendor would not get paid until the state or the entity is paid. And so, I'm sure if there are state agencies on the call today, you might be familiar with that practice. So I would anticipate that it could operate like that.
So then it's not technically reimbursed, it's sending an invoice that hasn't actually been paid yet.
Well, the state would get reimbursed. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just what I've heard.
Yeah.
So, and I'll say a couple of words about the match side of things. I think one of the entities here is that you should talk about the match is definitely utility companies, because they have really vested interest to see this moving forward, and they have done, many of them have make-ready programs for this kind of installation, and those could be counted as a match there in many of these. So that's a one discussion that I would also have very early.
Sure. So Christopher, I see your question. Could we have an example of an application that's been approved? This is the first year of the program, so I don't believe that there are any past examples of applications to help for estimating costs for projects. I think that certainly, Gyro Electric or certs can point to some cost estimates or places where you can find costs. And I mean, you really should just contact some EV charging companies and ask them for bids for the kinds of equipment that you're talking about and thinking about in your area, whether it's level 2 or DC fast charger. So you should be able to get that, and perhaps either them or some electricians on the installation side of things. Do you have any thoughts about kind of those estimates?
No, I think that's definitely true. That's to talk with the different stakeholders and see what they can provide you, and then get a budget together. I think the other entity to talk to would also be a state officials like from DOT, who have been working with the NEVI funding things. They have already done some estimates of what some things might cost. So using those local resources, even from the NEVI report here in state, would probably be useful.
Well, and so will the Drive Electric team will ask the state if they have any examples that we could include in follow-up? Because if they have some, we'll just include it. But I don't know if they have it kind of just sitting out there where you can find it.
And the VW, if you've got any, and I'm not sure how long your VW money's been available, but if it's been funding stuff for years, that would be a good place to start too.
It has been funding stuff for a few years, but we've also heard, what I've also heard over the last year or so is that more of the vendors are, the prices are really increasing because of shortages and components. And so even an estimate you had last year can be percentage, like up to 10 or more percent.
I think that's why we went from 500,000 where we thought to now that they're saying 1 million. So
yeah, it's a lot. So, okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And I will also add to that the VW settlement RFQs and stuff like that were funded, those awards. We're looking at more like 50 kilowatt, one DC fast charger on one site. So they are much smaller site installations than what we would recommend right now. Definitely what I would take a look at there is the future proofing, because that was written very well into the Minnesota plan. So make sure that you do similar kind of future proofing, but maybe take it to the next level from what those plans were requiring.
All right. There was one other question about can an application be filled into an online database, or do we download? You'll have to go to the application. I'm not sure about some of the real specific questions about, how to upload it or download it. You'll have to go to the the website and work that, unless Mike knows some of the answers to this question.
yeah, I mean, I'm gonna put the link in for grants.gov and just kind of follow the instructions. Typically, you're uploading like I said, either a Word doc or PDF. The government is not, able to generate forms online. I don't think you'd even want it, probably crash.
I'm actually, this is very positive information as somebody's asking details about how to upload the grant. So it sounds like they're already pretty far in their
that is
process
good
already.
news.
So that's good.
Maybe, that's great. We're trying to figure out where they're gonna start putting their information. So thanks for that. Any other questions? Panelists or hosts that have for each other or anything? I mean, this has been super enlightening and really grateful to the team of presenters. Thank you, Mike, for being here from the Joint Office. We really appreciate the love for the Midwest. Yuka, our, I was gonna say homegrown, but you're not really homegrown. Our Finnish-born EV expert and guru to join us, and my colleagues at Great Plains Institute, Moaz, for presenting earlier, Caitlin and Samantha in the background doing lots of the stuff in the background, helping set things up. I really appreciate the team and the collaboration. Happy to bring this information to Minnesota. We want to see as many funding proposals as possible for Minnesota and get all the charging. And especially, there's an opportunity to get some charging that's not on those NEVI corridors. Getting some of this in communities across Minnesota. So I'm really excited about that potential. It looks like Q&A. Thank you. Oh, do we know if Tesla chargers are going to get used universally or typical only for their models? I don't know. When did Elon Musk say 2 years ago that he was going to open it up? I mean, who knows?
I mean, they're starting pilots.
Are they? Oh,
Yeah.
where?
New
Here?
York, and I can't remember where else.
They should do it here.
I mean, believe it or not, I was just on a call with them yesterday, and they do want to work with the states. They're trying to figure out how, but I agree with you, Diane. I mean, they made these announcements a while ago. I would not stop anything that you're doing. Hopefully, when it does happen, it will provide redundancy or, help, if there's an area that's congested, if there's another one next to it. So, I think it is coming, but it may be a ways off. Don't stop and wait, but I do think it will be helpful eventually.
Yeah. It would be great. It's been a long time. And I mean, am I wrong that the big concern is to make sure that Tesla drivers, when they get to them, don't have to wait for some other non-Tesla driver to charge?
I think that's what they're worried about. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I understand they built this network.
Right.
It will require quite a bit of hardware replacements there, so it'll not just happen. Okay, let's just change software. So they have to, even if the pilots that they're right now doing is using their existing stations and just adding a little adapter there, but that doesn't cut to all of the others because the cords are so short. So they have to start installing the version 4 hardware, at least the dispensers, most likely also something on the power structure. So it'll take some time. It's not going to happen overnight.
All right. Well, no one's ever mad at us ending early. It's 2:28. We don't need to stay on just because we're going to go till 2:30. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, team. Really happy to bring this to Minnesota. Again, we want our share. We want our fair share of charging in Minnesota. So go after that. If you need help, reach out to us. We can try to help. We've got that partner list, but we can try to connect you with others. We have relationships with utilities and with regional development organizations. So reach out to CERTS or Drive Electric, and we're happy to help make connections. So thanks, everyone. Happy Tuesday.
Bye.
Nice job.